Welcome, I'm Scott Graffius, and it's my pleasure to talk with you this afternoon, India Standard Time. I'm in Los Angeles, so it's in the evening, Friday evening, my time. And I know we have other visitors from around the world too, so hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I want to mention up front that for content accessibility purposes, this presentation deliberately uses large size fonts and some high contrast elements, including custom vibrant visuals. And I will also be describing the content on screen. Now, in most cases, I won't be reading content word for word. There are just a few screens that have very little text, and in those cases I will, but mostly I'll just be summarizing what's on screen as we go through the presentation. So here we go. Want great information technology, and who doesn't, right? Among other things, it takes a great team. So we've been getting some great tips and insight from others on the technical front. This is non-technical information that's proven that can help you and your teams and your company have a competitive advantage by being able to move more quickly, whether you're agile or not, in a more agile fashion. So that's what this talk is about. And if you're not familiar, and if you aren't, you will be in just a moment, this is about Bruce Tuckman's phases of team development. It's a model that was created quite some time ago, more on that in a moment, but it stood the test of time, and that's the important thing, because it remains highly relevant and beneficial in tech, non-tech, all disciplines, all sectors. And I have some examples on that in a moment. So if you're a leader, or you'd like to be one, you're a member of a team, or you might be one in the future, and that pretty much covers everyone, I think. Or you're just looking to develop your skills. This talk, which is based on Tuckman's model, but with a fresh perspective, 0% theory, 100% usable practical information. We'll give you a framework with tips for working in and leading teams successfully. I'd like to pause for just another moment because I had some technical issues with this tool. I wanted to see if the organizers can jump in and confirm that they can see my screen and hear me okay.
Yes, Scott. We are able to see your screen and we are good, yeah.
Thank you very much, appreciate it. So here's the objectives for this talk, which is gonna run 30 to 45 minutes in total. At the end of it, you should have a high level of understanding, because this is a quick talk, right? About the 5 phases of team development and the characteristics of each one. And then most importantly, the usable strategies that you can employ, or anyone in your organization, to help the teams move from start to finish and be more successful. So here's how this talk is structured. The agenda is introduction to objectives and agenda, which we're almost done on right now. And then there's a little bit of about information so I can give you a proper introduction with regards to my background, which will run about a minute or so, which is next. And then the main portion of this talk is the 5 phases of team development. A quick wrap up, there's a digital download takeaway. So I'll mention it up front, the details will come at the end of the talk, but the main visual overview that you'll see in a few minutes is in the takeaway that I created just for you for attending this talk, if you'd like it. And there's also a bibliography in the takeaway as well. And then time for Q&A, and thank you at the very end. During the talk, I've learned that I'm just going to be really focused on delivering the content to you, and I'll be taking the questions at the end. Should we not have time to get to your questions, or you have a question later on that comes to you, while you're working, you're thinking maybe about some of these aspects perhaps, you can always reach out to me. So there's information on the conference website, there's some information in this presentation, and there's also information in the digital download takeaway as far as ways you can get a hold of me through LinkedIn or Twitter or my website and so on. So here's a little bit of information about me. I'm the CEO of Exceptional PPM and PMO Solutions, and those are acronyms, those are shorthand for Project Portfolio Management and Project Management Office. What that really means is project, program, portfolio, PMO, agile, traditional. So we help client organizations fortify their capabilities and best achieve their strategic initiatives. And every company is unique, of course, really almost by definition. But typically what people are looking for is getting more things done more quickly, higher satisfaction, on schedule, and so on, just to give you a sense. And then a little bit about me, and then we'll move into the main portion of the talk. I'm the founder and CEO of Exceptional. I'm a project management practitioner, consultant, author, and speaker. And I'm honored that content from my books and speaking engagements and other things I've published have been used by a variety of different sources, including media outlets, publications, governments, universities, and others. Just a few examples include the United States Department of Energy, Computer Weekly, Techstars, Gartner, Cisco, Ford, Texas A&M University, New Zealand government, to name a few. And then for anyone who's curious, I hold 7 professional credentials. The first 4 are related to Agile and Scrum in particular. Then there's the Project Management Professional, ITIL, and Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. And then lastly, as far as background about myself, just to give you a sense, I've worked in a variety of different industries or sectors, if you will, or businesses, ranging from advanced tech to e-commerce to entertainment, government, telco, and others. And I am what some people refer to as an agile coach or a project management professional, project management leader, but I have consistently worked in technology organizations. So I've always reported to the CIO or the CTO or the head of development. So the information that I'm about to present to you is really grounded, not just, again, no research, no theory. It's all practically usable information, but it's grounded on my practical real world experience. Here we go. So a little bit of context so that, again, no theory, just context so that when I show you the details, it'll make more sense and be more easily, readily usable. So Bruce Tuckman, who got his doctorate in psychology from Princeton University, conducted extensive research on team dynamics, also known as team development, group dynamics, group development, and some other labels. Anyways, he produced a model way back in 1965. But here's the most important thing, is that model continues to remain relevant and beneficial today. I'll give you a few examples that perhaps you can relate to. So again, this presentation draws on my firsthand experience, and it's supported by additional research, recommendation, and coverage from a variety of sources. I won't list them all. Of course, this is just a small sample, but Microsoft, the IEEE, Harvard Business Review, IBM, Project Management Institute, MIT, to name a few. Of course, if you were to Google it, there would be tens of thousands of results. The reason I show you those, because you might be able to relate to some of them, it really underscores that the model is continuing to be shown as relevant and valuable. All of those examples I just showed you a moment ago, and by the way, the details are in the bibliography. All of those diverse sources were all published in the last 10 years, advocating for Tuckman's model. Now, they tend to be very high level and short on detail. This presentation is about practical detail that you can use, so that's what makes this different. But not only were they published in the last 10 years, many of them in the last year. So I don't know about you, but when talking about models, it's often helpful, at least I find it to be the case, to present the information in some sort of a friendly visual format that's just easy to follow, and it just means creating something that didn't already exist. So when I was contemplating this presentation, that's what I did. And, you know, at least for this presentation, I can only speak for this one, for this subject matter, in deciding how I can kind of assemble this information so that it's easy to follow or as easy as possible to follow and make sense and it's usable. I thought about different kinds of tools in terms of presentation. Clip art just doesn't work. no stock photos, and definitely no generic content. So here is the phases of team development, which is a custom visual that I created, which gives the overview. Now, you won't be able to see the detail in this view, but in a minute or so, we'll zoom in and start going through the different phases, and then you'll be able to make out those details at that time. But before we do that, let me just kind of describe the layout of this visual, and then we'll get into the detail. So below the graph is a table, and the table has 5 columns representing the 5 different phases of team development. Bruce Tuckman, his research has advocated in all of the studies done since his research, since 1965, which is substantial, has validated that it's inevitable that teams go through these 5 phases. Now, some teams go through it quicker than others, and we'll get into that, but these are normal, healthy phases, despite labels like storming, which kind of on its face sounds very negative, but again, I'll describe these in just a moment. So you normally would be moving from left to right, from forming to storming, to norming to performing to adjourning. And in the table, the first row is the characteristics. So these are the things that you typically see during the phase. Kind of almost like, if you're not already familiar with the model, would be the diagnostic tool to kind of see where the team is. And then the row below that are strategies. These are the practical, proven things that you, somebody else in the team, it could be somebody inside the team, somebody outside the team, it could be a project manager, it could be a tech lead, it could be a scrum master, it could be an executive sponsor. It doesn't matter who that person is. These are the strategies that can be employed to help the team grow and develop, which really means move to the next phase. So that's the overview before we get into the detail. And, but before doing that, it's all about people. And again, no clip art, no stock photos, nothing like that. So this is a very important and frankly, a very serious subject, really, because of its implications and the potential value. But that doesn't mean that we can't have this be a little bit light and fun. So what I did was I reflected on, in terms of capturing a visual of the team, to accompany that overview visual I just showed you as we go through the details, I contemplated, well, Tuckman's model was created in 1965. What was established around that time frame that maybe I could springboard from? And I don't know if there's any Lego fans out there, but here they are. This is the visual for the team. These are the Lego versions, obviously, which are more modern, of the characters that were created back in 1969. Tuckman's model was in 1965. So anyways, that's a photograph of the Lego figures of those characters. So here we go. First up is forming. And here's a visual of the team. This is representing a team that has been brought together to do some sort of unique bit of work. It could be a DevOps team that's newly formed or has a new team member on it. It could be a new project team. It doesn't really matter what kind of a team or group it is. The idea, though, is that they've been assembled for some purpose to achieve some sort of a goal. It could be a team that runs for a week. It could be a team that runs for years, but it's a team that's formed. And so what you typically see at this very first phase out of 5 phases is things are new. And so there's a level of excitement with a lot of people. So you typically see some eagerness, some socializing, especially if one or more of the team members haven't worked together before. In terms of tone, people are generally very polite, sticking to safe topics, but this is new. And even if the individuals have been provided with information, there's still some questioning and uncertainty about exactly how they fit in and how the team is going to achieve the goal. So some questioning is quite normal and typical. But now that you know what the characteristics are, here are the strategies to help the team grow and advance on to the next phase. So this would be the opposite of a backseat driver, or somebody who's in the back seat and silent. Somebody needs to be very visible and very directive. And one thing that can be done is, just to give a few additional examples here, would be some companies do icebreakers, some don't. You don't have to. But if one or more of the individuals hasn't worked together before, it might be nice to spend, 5-10 minutes doing icebreakers or otherwise facilitating introductions. If there is some big picture, top-down type of information available for this work that they're doing, now's the time to share it. It's okay I'm speaking like to the executives, it's okay to not have all the details on day one, right? But if, I'm just going to give a hypothetical, but if management wants something to be produced and delivered on or before January 1st, if that's the case, that should be communicated now, right? So providing the big picture is something that can be quite helpful. Whatever is available and whatever isn't available can be provided later on when it becomes available. So the example I gave you might be an example of success criteria. So whatever it is that's the expectation should be clearly articulated and understood by the team. And when people have questions, the turnaround time should be quick to help the team best move on to the next phase, which is storming. And here, in a moment, the visual will be quite different for the team. Again, this is a very normal phase for the team to go through. Some teams go through it quicker than others, but here's what typically occurs during storming. In some people, there might be some differences of opinions and feelings, and there might be some formal or informal jockeying for a position within the team, some competition, if you will. Compared to other phases, emotions might be higher than other parts of phases of the team development. Some people might even have some level of resistance. But here's the tip and hint that the team is starting to move out of storming and into norming, and that's that the word here is norms, is that things start to quiet down and they start to kind of establish their own normalcy and cadence in terms of how they're behaving and what they're doing. More on that with some examples here. So this is what can be done to help the team move out of storming and into norming, which would be phase 3. So for storming, the person, again, it can be a scrum master, a project manager, a tech lead, somebody inside the team, somebody outside the team. It doesn't matter who that person is, but requesting and encouraging feedback. And I know that just sounds really simple, but believe me, it's not. And what I mean by that is tone and body language, not just going and saying, yes, if you have feedback, let me know and walk away, but rather making it clear that maybe you even expect feedback. If you have a problem or you have a question, please let me know. I expect you to come into my office or join me on Skype or join me on Zoom or Teams or whatever the mechanism is for COVID or post-COVID communicating with people. So it's really important to really request and encourage feedback. So that it bears repeating, and that's why I did repeat that. And some issues might be quite obvious, but the ones that aren't obvious will come out through getting feedback from people. And then once they're known, I don't know about you, but it's hard to solve something if you don't know what the problem is. But once you know what the problem is, you can facilitate the resolution. So the last bullet point on this list of strategies is about trust. Now, trust is a very important principle and concept, but the way that you can establish trust, to be practical about it, is because how do you can't force trust, right? So how do you do that? Well, the best way to do it, at least as it pertains to this model, is by honoring commitments and being consistent. So I'll give you a quick example. This won't apply to everyone. It'll just give you an idea though. Let's say it's an agile team, doesn't have to be, but let's say it's an agile team and there's a commitment that every workday between 9 and 9:15 local time, the team will get together and the individuals will talk about, what they had achieved since the last meeting and things they're going to work on in the new business day and, obstacles or issues, that sort of thing, right? And let's say the commitment is that it's going to happen every workday. Now, listen, I know things happen. So, maybe one gets canceled here or there. These things happen, right? To be realistic. But let's say 3 of them get canceled in a row. I'm telling you, that's not good, especially if a team's in the storming phase or any phase for that matter, but especially if they're in the in the storming phase. It's by honoring commitments is the best way to build trust. So those are the proven practical strategies for helping the team grow and advance. And here we're moving on. I'm keeping an eye on time here. Here we are moving on to norming, which is the 3rd phase. And here you have a very, very different visual of the team. There's almost sort of an informal or formal hierarchy establishing with the team here. In terms of characteristics, I'm going to jump to the last bullet point in this table here because it kind of reflects on the visual, and that's that there's developing a cohesion. So that's why I'm showing the team beside these examples from the overview visual, is because it really reinforces how things are quite different from phase to phase. Now, compared to previously, the purpose and goals are much more well understood, and that translates directly or indirectly to higher confidence and commitment, and generally team members are very engaged and they're supportive. Now, norming is the second highest performance-wise. It's the second highest phase, and we'll talk about the highest one in just a moment. But during this one phase here of norming, there is, compared to storming and forming, if there was any anxiety earlier, there's a lowered anxiety and there's relief during the norming phase. And again, it bears repeating, the team is starting to develop some cohesion. So here are the things that you can do to help them grow and advance and move on to the next phase, right? Versus just kind of letting things go, happen on their own. And that's the whole point really of these strategies, or the things that you can help the team move more quickly from phase to phase. So anyways, recognizing individual and team efforts. I mean, these may not be surprises to you, but common sense is not common practice. So common sense is not common practice. So recognizing individual and team efforts goes a long ways here. Providing learning opportunities and feedback. Feedback applies to all phases, but it bears repeating here. And then if it makes sense based on your culture and your company and what the team is working on, delegating freely within the team. And then the lead here is kind of monitoring the energy. So they're at the second highest level of performance right now. So when I talked about the forming phase 1, somebody was very much upfront and directive. Here, somebody's kind of like pulling back and monitoring how things are going and only intervening if and when necessary. So those are the strategies for norming to move to the highest level of performance, which is where teams generally spend most of their time, calendar-wise, and that's performing. And here, the visual for the team, quite different. So in terms of characteristics, I'm going to jump to the 4th bullet point here, which is interdependence and self-management, also sometimes referred to as self-organization. And the reason I wanted to start with that is because I think that more than anything else speaks to the visual of the team to the left of the table. So what you usually see is very high motivation, trust, and empathy. And an example of that is individuals deferring to the larger team needs. It's very typical. Of course, there's performance here. This is the highest level of performance, is the performing phase, the 4th phase. So the team is producing their deliverables and they're balancing task and process. And just another way to look at that is strategic and tactical. They're keeping an eye on the big picture, but they're delivering the tasks, right? The individual tasks that need to be that are part of the deliverables that are in scope for this endeavor that they're working on. So here are the strategies to help the team grow and advance. You might ask me, which would be a fair question, What are you talking about? This is the highest level of performance. How did they grow and advance? Well, keep in mind, this is an active phase right now. They're not done yet. So the next phase, which is adjourning, will cover when everything is done, what will occur. So this is really more about keeping the momentum going more than it is anything else. So guiding from the side or minimal intervention, celebrating milestone successes, celebrating the success of the complete project will be covered in just a moment in the next phase, and encouraging, collective decision making and problem solving, although they're probably already doing that now. If they are, you're encouraging them to continue. If they're not, you're going to encourage them to do that. These are things that are quite helpful for teams, even high level performing teams in the performing phase. The very last phase is the journey. And here, the visual for the team is quite different, almost opposite of forming, really. So here are the characteristics. Before I get into some of them, I wanted to mention that if you were to Google Bruce Tuckman or some of the keywords, from this presentation, some of the results will talk about the 4 phases of team development. And that's wrong. And here's why. Bruce Tuckman personally, in 1977, added adjourning to his own model. His original model did have 4 phases: forming, storming, norming, and performing. But because Bruce Tuckman personally updated his own model in 1977 to include adjourning, which is also sometimes called outperforming, transitioning, mourning, and other things, but he originally called it adjourning. Because he did that in 1977, I don't know about you, but I would think people would be on board with that. But still, you see a lot of results, not the majority, but you see a good quantity of them talking about the 4 phases. So if you ever come across that, you know the background and context. So the right answer, because we're talking about Tuckman's model here, is 5 phases. So what happens in the journeying is the project is done. And I'll talk in just a moment, if there's time at the end, about DevOps and teams that kind of never really formally totally disband. And this model still applies to them. It's just a little bit different. But let's talk about an agile project, and maybe a cycle was 2 weeks using the most common duration, or a more traditional project on the more extreme side that was 100 people and it ran for a year. And at the end of the project, the company had a fantastic result. They shook up and they shook up the landscape. They disrupted the environment, is what a lot of people refer to that when they talk about disruption. And they had more customers and more revenue, and they hired more people, and everybody got bonuses. It was just a fantastic endeavor. So it'll vary depending on what company you're in, what culture you're in, the size of the project, agile or not. The details will vary, obviously. But just giving you a sense that the project is over. And here are the things that can be done to help the team grow. And you might again say, well, what are you talking about? Because they're done. Well, this is really about helping the team and the company grow. And here are a few examples of strategies that are recommended, and they're proven as being successful with most companies. So recognizing change, again, it might be obvious that everything is done, but if there's a team member and they were pulled out of their normal department to work on something for a year, and they've never done that before, they kind of have to be reminded, thank you very much, recognizing what they had done, and that the endeavor is over in the case of a project, using my extreme example of 100 people running for a year and so on. So at this point, lessons learned, some refer to it as post-project review, post-mortem, or retrospective. Doesn't matter what the label is. This is an opportunity for evaluations so that you can understand what went well, what didn't go well, and what would you change if you had to do over again, so that the company would be at a advantage should there be a similar project in the future. So this is why it really helps individuals and the company at this point to capture that information. If I didn't say so already, recognizing individual contributions in addition to team and company impact contributions. And then usually there's some type of a celebration. It'll vary again by company and by project and project duration and project size. I'll use the example of 100 people working on something for a year, but it still applies in other cases, and that there's often some sort of a recognition that occurs, at a town hall meeting or, standard department meeting or something along those lines. If it's a large endeavor, it's not unusual for companies to have some sort of, and this might be more of a pre-COVID or a post-COVID scenario example, but to have some sort of a party, a get-together, during business hours. And then sometimes there's even parties that happen additionally outside of business hours at a neighboring restaurant or something along those lines. So I use the term after party. It has multiple connotations. There's after party in the sense of, well, the project is done, in that sense of after. It's after party in the sense that there might be multiple celebrations or parties that occur. So I guess the point is party, party, party. That can be quite helpful. So in about a minute or so earlier, I gave some examples of questions that are typically asked during the retrospective or the post-project review. And it doesn't really matter the exact questions that are asked, but teams can get a bit bored being asked, what went well, what didn't go well, or, what would you change? Nothing wrong with those questions. But what I have found is to ask a question differently, it can be quite advantageous. So here's one option that you might want to consider if you haven't already. This is the question that the team would ask and answer. How can we, the team, make an even bigger positive impact on the company? And this is subject to interpretation, and that's a good thing, because you're going to get all kinds of different answers than you would if you asked a very pointed, closed question. So, and it may be things that they weren't big issues that percolated over the project but they were just things that now that you ask me, now that you mention it, if we only had the latest version of the Microsoft blank blank blank, or whatever, you'd be surprised what comes out by asking these kinds of alternative questions. Here's another example. How can we, the team, achieve even greater ease of work? So by asking alternative questions, you can get some quite insightful responses that you're able to incorporate the learnings from for future projects. So those are the key highlights. I'm looking at my time here. I've got just a few minutes remaining. Those are the key highlights for the 5 phases of team development. And as I mentioned, the direction is normally from left to right. The direction can, and it's rare, but the direction can go from right to left. I'll give you an example, a very straightforward example. Team is 5 people. They're a web development related team. They've been working together for quite a while. They're extremely successful, very high performance, and they're clearly in the performing phase of